We constantly bemoan how governments don't perform, how civil servants don't perform, how they are just unmotivated people. And yet there's an obvious answer, which is we don't reward them for performance.
Wherever you are in the world, you can be sure that no one likes paying taxes. And yet, when it comes to a country's ability to develop and grow out of poverty, taxes are the key. This is a story about taxes. A story about how better tax policy can help a country grow. This story may be based in Pakistan, but the lessons learned can be used throughout the developing world.
So Pakistan is a developing country. Compared to a country of this size, the level of education, literacy, healthcare, sanitation, and provision of other services is abysmally low.
A fundamental reason for Pakistan's problems is that it does not raise enough taxes. Pakistan's revenue is just 9% of their gross domestic product, GDP. That is low even for a developing country.
When people don't get enough services, they don't want to pay revenues to the state, and the state can't provide those services because it doesn't have enough revenues. So that vicious cycle has to be broken at some stage.
Something had to be done. Economists are now working with the Pakistani government to address this problem in a project facilitated by the International Growth Centre. Following a thorough collaborative analysis, they honed in on the key issue: the low motivation and productivity of the people collecting the taxes, the tax collectors.
There was a poor public image, there was large complaints regarding the excesses of the employees, and then of course there were pilferages, there were suppressions and so on and so forth. Even if we undertake reforms in the tax policy, on the tariff and exemption and so on, yet it's not going to work well until we focus on the human resource.
One of the questions you ask, and often I ask this to myself, is why would they work? If you are paid to show up pretty much and not monitored, not rewarded, not held accountable, but at the same time not kind of appreciated for what you're doing, why would you work?
If you think about your property taxes in a typical developed country like in the US, for example, there's a lot of automation that goes behind it. And here it's not like that at all. What the tax department knows is what the tax inspector figures out. And so it's a tremendous amount of work to spend your days in the field, walking around the neighborhoods, figuring out where the new construction was, and making sure that those new properties get taxed.
The persons who are working in poor areas where the collection of tax is very, very, very hard and difficult, so those persons should be given incentive.
The economists had isolated the problem, but how to fix it? In order to decide on the best policy, the economists designed an experiment to test these against each other. Just as in a medical trial, tax officers in the Punjab area of Pakistan were randomly selected to receive different treatments, in this case different pay-for-performance schemes. Within the treatment group, there were 3 different pay-for-performance schemes. The first was a simple pay per revenue. The more taxes collected, the higher the tax collector's salary, just like the commission a salesperson might make. The second took into account both the revenue and also a measure of quality of service and customer satisfaction, that is, feedback from the public being taxed. The third was a flexible payment scheme. Payment was not just based on taxes collected, but also a set of quality control criteria. The experiment ran across 500 tax offices, 1 per neighborhood, and results were monitored for 2 years.
Overall, the pay for performance worked. It substantially raised revenue, and surprisingly, there was very little detectable downsides. So we asked people their satisfaction with the tax department and didn't really change, even though revenue went up. That's in some sense a win for the government.
My name is Ahmed Aziz Tarar. I work for Excise and Taxation Department, where I'm working as Director General. As a result of the research, we enhanced the pay packages of the employees and linked it with their performance. That how much tax they will collect, they will get a certain percentage of that tax collected as a reward. The employees sometimes got 400,000, 500,000 rupees as a reward, which was much higher than the pay which they were actually getting, and which resulted into enhancement of the taxation in the next year around 30 to 40%.
मेरा ज़ाती ख्याल ये है कि सबसे बेहतर और अच्छी स्कीम जो है वो इंसेंटिव स्कीम है। उससे उनकी कारकर्दगी बेहतर हो रही है, उससे उनके मसाइल, मुआशी मसाइल हल होते हैं, उससे उनके ज़हनी तौर पे वो थोड़ा रिलैक्स महसूस करते हैं और उस स्कीम से उनकी कारकर्दगी गवर्नमेंट के टैक्स रेवेन्यू में इजाफा होता है।
Not only are we able to raise more taxes, but in fact, the way this is working is we're demonstrating at the same time that when you pay the same workers, the same people who you had branded as corrupt, as lazy, as inefficient, these are the same guys. We're not hiring new people. It's the same individuals who for the past several years have fallen into what you would call these bad habits. In fact, they're now performing, are now bringing in extra money. And in fact, they're more than paying for their own additional rewards that they're getting. So from the state's perspective, this is a positive net return on their investment. And you could go to a bank and borrow from a bank and say, why don't you invest in us and look what we get.
It's very essential for research to be carried out by neutral researchers, policies that emanate out of evidence, but also policies that emanate out of that evidence being presented to politicians who are actual policymakers at the end of the day in a way that is win-win for them politically as well as a win-win for the service delivery aspect of it. And I think that's the real value of bringing in international experience as well as good expertise to make that bridge between politicians, evidence, and policymaking.
This relationship needs to be sustained because it is changing the culture of policy making. That's a generalizable issue. It's not just limited to the tax department, but it also applies to education, it applies to health, etc. This research is having far greater benefit in terms of returns than we first envisaged when we went in.
And this project has demonstrated that when you take a population, in fact, tax collectors are the most decried population. When we take tax collectors and we get them to perform, the same guys, suddenly when they're incentivized, change their behavior and bring more resources into the system, that to me is extremely optimistic. Now imagine what you could do in other services. Imagine what you could do in education. Imagine what you could do in health. Now maybe I'm over-ambitious about this, but I feel like this is how the world begins. You start with these small projects, you demonstrate powerful effects from these, and then you just proceed. It's systematic, gradual, but hopefully really powerful reform.
Taxes matter, but it's what you do with them that counts. This project would not have been possible without the leadership, insight and support of several key decision makers from the government of Punjab, including Chief Minister Muhammad Shahbaz Sharif.